Forget the marble temples and the emperors in their togas for a moment. Forget the gladiators, the epic battles, the senators giving grand speeches. That's the Rome of the movies. And it's the Rome of maybe 1% of the people who actually lived there. What about everyone else? The million ordinary people packed into the greatest city on earth 2,000 years ago. What was a single normal day actually like for them? Imagine you could wake up inside that world. Not as an emperor, not as a general, just as an average Roman in an average home, living one completely ordinary day. It would be louder than you expect. It would smell worse than you can imagine. And by nightfall, you might be very glad you were only visiting. So let's do it. From dawn to dark, this is what one day in ancient Rome would really feel like. Your day begins at dawn, whether you like it or not. There are no alarm clocks, but you won't need one. As the sun comes up, the city explodes into noise, and you are woken not in a quiet bedroom, but in a cramped little room several floors up in a towering apartment block called an insula. Forget the beautiful villa with the courtyard and the fountain. That's the domus, and only the rich have one. You, like the vast majority of Romans, live in an insula. These were apartment buildings, some of them rising up to 6 or even 8 stories high, packed tightly together across the city. As early as 150 BCE, there were already tens of thousands of them. And here's the counterintuitive part. In these buildings, you did not want to live at the top. It was the exact opposite of today. The wealthiest tenants took the ground floor and the lower levels, which were more spacious and closer to everything. The higher you climbed, the smaller, cheaper, and more miserable the rooms became. And you live near the top. Your apartment is likely a single cramped room. There's little furniture. There's no running water. There's no kitchen and no stove. The windows have no glass, just wooden shutters you close against the night. In winter, your only heat comes from a small portable brazier, a metal basket of hot coals, which fills the room with smoke and constantly threatens to burn the whole building down. And fire is a very real fear. These towers were built of wood and brick, packed with people and open flames. They burned down with terrifying regularity, so often that the emperor eventually had to create Rome's first organized fire brigade, just to fight the constant blazes. So you wake up in your smoky little room at the top of a rickety tower, and you face your first problem of the day. You need a toilet, and you don't have one. To relieve yourself, to wash, to eat, for almost everything, you have to go outside and down. Many people on the upper floors simply used a chamber pot, and the contents of that pot did not always make the long trip down to the ground floor. Sometimes it just went out the window, into the street below, which is a very good reason to be careful when walking through Rome. So down you go, down the dark, narrow staircase, and out into the street. And this is where ancient Rome truly overwhelms the senses. The noise hits you first. One Roman writer bitterly complained that there was no place in the city for a poor man to think or rest. Schoolmasters shouting in the morning, bakers working through the night, and the endless hammering of the coppersmiths all day long. The streets are a crush of people. Vendors shouting. Animals, craftsmen, hawkers. The constant roar of a million people crammed into a walled city. And here's an odd detail. During the day, the streets are packed with people but strangely free of wheeled traffic. Carts and wagons were banned from the city during daylight hours, precisely because the crowds were so dense. All the deliveries happened at night, which meant the city that never slept was also rattling with cartwheels through the small hours. You're hungry. But remember, you have no kitchen. So like millions of Romans, you don't cook breakfast. You buy it. Breakfast, the ientaculum, is a simple thing grabbed on the go. Maybe a piece of bread, dipped in wine or in a little oil and salt, perhaps some cheese, an egg, or a bit of fruit. You eat it standing up on your way to work. And if you want something hot later, you head to a thermopolium. This was ancient Rome's version of fast food, a counter open to the street, with large jars sunk into the stonework holding warm food and drink. For the ordinary Roman with no stove at home, these street food bars weren't a luxury. They were how you ate a hot meal at all. Now it's time for work. Whatever your trade, baker, potter, builder, shopkeeper, dock worker, your working day starts early and, thankfully, ends early too. Most Romans worked from dawn through to the early afternoon, and then, remarkably, the rest of the day was largely their own. Around midday, you'd pause for the prandium, lunch, which was just as light as breakfast. Often simply cold leftovers from the night before, some bread, cheese, or fruit. There was no long, elaborate midday meal for working people, and in the heat of summer, many Romans took a break in the hottest part of the afternoon, a kind of siesta, when parts of the city went quiet. But once work is done in the early afternoon, you arrive at the true heart of Roman daily life. the place where the ordinary Roman actually relaxed. The baths. You cannot understand Rome without understanding the baths, because for the average person, this was the center of the entire social world. Bathing wasn't done at home in the morning or evening. It was a public, communal, afternoon event, and almost everyone took part. The baths were far more than a place to get clean. They were a spa, a gym, a social club, and a gossip network all rolled into one. You'd move through a sequence of rooms. Warm rooms, hot steaming rooms, and a bracing cold plunge. You'd exercise. You'd have your skin scraped clean with oil and a curved metal tool, since there was no soap as we know it. And above all, you'd talk. This was where you met your friends, did business, heard the news, argued politics, and simply soaked away the grime of a hard city day. Rich and poor mixed here in a way they did almost nowhere else. For a few hours, in the warm water and the echoing halls, a poor man from the top of a crumbling insula could relax like a king. And when the bathing is done, it's time for the one meal that actually matters. Dinner. The cena. This was the main event of the Roman day, usually beginning in the late afternoon, around what we'd call 3 or 4 o'clock. For working people, it was a social occasion, a chance to gather with family and friends after the labor of the day. Now, what's on the table depends enormously on who you are. If you were wealthy, dinner could be an extravagant, hours-long affair of many courses. Exotic meats, rich sauces, wine, and entertainment. But for you, the ordinary Roman, it's far simpler. Your diet is built around what people called the Mediterranean triad: grain, olive oil, and wine. Bread and porridge made from grain were the staples. Add some vegetables, olives, cheese, maybe some fish, and wine watered down to drink. Meat was a treat, not a daily habit. It's a humble meal. But after a long day in the roar and stink of the city, sharing food and watered wine with the people you care about, it's a genuinely good moment. Maybe the best of the day. And then, as the light fades, the city changes again. Rome had almost no street lighting. Once the sun went down, the tangled streets became pitch black and genuinely dangerous. Without a torch, and ideally a companion or two, wandering the night city was asking to be robbed, or worse. So most ordinary people did the sensible thing. They went home, shuttered the windows, and stayed in. But the city itself doesn't sleep. Remember those banned carts? Now, in the darkness, they finally roll in. All night long, the wagons that couldn't enter by day come rumbling through, delivering the food and goods that a million people need to survive. So as you lie in your cramped room at the top of your insula, trying to sleep, the streets below rattle and groan with the traffic that the daylight would not allow. You close your wooden shutters against the cold and the dark. Somewhere below, a cart rumbles past. Somewhere, a baby cries through a thin wall. The brazier's coals glow faintly in the corner. And you drift off, an ordinary person at the end of an ordinary day, in the greatest city the ancient world ever built. So, would you have wanted to live there? Let's be honest about it. A day in ordinary Rome was loud, cramped, smelly, and often dangerous. Live in a fire trap with no plumbing, dodge the contents of chamber pots in the street, and sleep above roads that thundered all night. By our standards, it was hard. But it wasn't all misery, and that's the part the grim details can hide. You worked only until early afternoon, and the rest of the day was yours. You spent your afternoons in magnificent public baths that even the poor could enter. You ate fresh street food, gathered for dinner with people you loved, and lived shoulder to shoulder in the beating heart of the biggest city on earth. For all its hardships, it was intensely, vividly alive. The Romans we remember are the emperors and the generals, carved in marble. But the real Rome, the living Rome, was built by these ordinary people. The ones crammed into the insulae. The ones grabbing breakfast at a street counter and soaking in the baths at noon. History barely recorded their names. We know them mostly from scratched graffiti, tomb inscriptions, and the ruins of the buildings they lived and died in. But they were the true Romans. And for one day, from a smoky room at dawn to a rattling street at midnight, you got to live exactly as they did. Not as an emperor. Just as one of the million people who actually were Rome.